Sleep is such an interesting issue, especially when it comes to folks who have trauma exposure and also just so many of the other things that go with first responder shift work and things like that. Sleep provides you with your physical restoration and also your emotional restoration. It helps you solidify memories for the day, which is why people who are really great sleepers have really good memories and they have really good concentration and attention. Also, specific hormones are released during your sleep cycle. So if you're not getting really good sleep, some of those hormones are usually low in your system, which can become a little bit problematic. And bottom line, we age slower. And so it's not a, it's if for nothing else, vanity. We want to be able to, have that really, really great life after retirement, and this is one way to have that. What's interesting about being underslept is we use 7 hours as the cutoff of underslept. And so for every 24 hours, you should be getting at least 8 hours, they say. But so the 7-hour mark is the underslept mark where we start the research on it. And what happens at that 7-hour mark is you start to have what are called micro sleeps. And you're going to be having them. You don't notice them. You can see them, obviously, if you were on camera. You could watch somebody have a micro sleep. But they do know that the more poorly you sleep regularly and the more underslept you are, those micro sleeps become longer. They can cause car accidents because you can be having a microsleep while you're driving and not knowing because your body is not recovered. And so you end up with this. So you're going to also have a lot of other problems when you're underslept. You're going to have difficulty regulating your own emotions, which is really hard. So I do see people from time to time who have really high anxiety. And that's the first question I ask them, how many hours a night do you sleep? And very often they're getting 4 or 5. And so yes, you're not going to get great emotional regulation at that low of sleep. And then also there are a lot of mental health disorders that sleep is one of the diagnostic criteria. So we ask about sleep because it is implicated in several mental health disorders because it will either, and they're not really sure which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Is it the sleep that causes the disorder, or is the lack of sleep? We just don't know. So the shorter you sleep over a lifetime, the shorter your life is going to be. So you want to have that as a serious consideration. You have to have a dark environment and it needs to be cold. Actually, they say the optimal temperature is about 65 degrees when we're sleeping, which is really hard here in Vegas, but in the wintertime, not so bad. We also want to have a really good sleep routine that we incorporate about 45 minutes before we want to go to sleep, so that's a relaxation routine that's getting us centered, that's getting us quieter, so that we can actually have good restful sleep. You also want to keep a very consistent sleep schedule. It's better if you sleep the same hours, basically for all 7 days of the week. The more you wiggle around in those hours, the more likely you are to have some issues with sleep. And then also you want to do things like avoid caffeine 8 to 10 hours before sleep. And I know for some people it's like, what? But that is really important. And also avoid alcohol too close to bed because it impairs certain stages of your sleep that are really important for recovery. If you are one of those first responders who has to sleep during the day, you do have some unique needs. And so here are some things that you can do to amplify the odds of you getting good restful sleep. Day sleeping tips are that you really want to make sure you keep that room really dark and cool, that near the end of your shift you want to, especially if you're working a night shift, you're working graveyards, you want to avoid as much light as possible. And it may seem a little silly, but before the sun comes up, you want to make sure your sunglasses are on because you want to avoid getting too much light into your eyes, which is how your circadian rhythm is set. You're going to avoid that caffeine again, 8 to 10 hours. So if you're going to go to bed, let's say at 9 a.m. in the morning, you would want to stop your drinking of any kind of caffeine by midnight, roughly, or a little bit earlier than that. You want to talk to your families about ways that everyone can overall decrease noise and really understand and support your sleep schedule. And it's always better if you sleep the same sleep schedule 7 days a week. It's really interesting because a lot of graveyard folks, what they'll do is they'll work their shift and then they go immediately to a day shift on their days off. And what we know about that from the sleep science is it's the equivalent of flying to Europe every week and back. So you are in a state of perpetual jet lag. So it's much better to stay on the same schedule 7 days a week. You'll actually feel better, although there are really no nighttime people. We don't adjust and adapt like physiologically to sleeping nights. There are larks, which are morning people, and owls, which are basically swing shift people. But so when you're working graveyard, you have to be particularly fanatical about your sleep in order to get good rest. For on-call folks, they sometimes struggle with something that we actually call sleep anxiety. So you feel like you aren't going to hear your phone, or you're not going to hear the call that you're going to be called out. And so people tend to actually sleep very shallow. So you have to teach yourself to overcome that anxiety and to prove to yourself, yes, of course I will wake up, or I have always woken up. And so that way you'll let yourself go into much deeper sleep, because it would be a lot better for you to get even 3 good deep hours of sleep before you get called out than to not let yourself sleep because you're on call, or sleep really shallow, which is not going to be as restful. And also after a long shift, especially for, I would say, firefighters in particular here, but even if you're on call and you just end up going deep into the next day because of a situation, you do want to always have a plan for a recovery day or a recovery sleep. So you want to actually have that arranged with your family, arranged with yourself, so that you know this is the protocol I follow after having been on shift or after having been on call. I think this is probably an area that a lot of families will argue about, is they are not communicating regularly about different family members' sleep needs and who is going to do what. And sometimes, unfortunately, because again, the first responders tend to be really stoic, sometimes they will, suck it up and do things that maybe aren't always in their family's even best interest, because they're getting so exhausted. And so to open those communications with family so that everybody understands everybody's sleep needs, making some agreements so that the sleep cycles for every person are protected as best as possible. And then also sometimes to just recognize that there are going to be these disruptions, and what are you going to do to make up for the disruptions. First responders do need to consider that everyone in the family may have very different sleep needs, and as a result, having really open communication about those varying needs is very important. Sometimes the sleep needs of the first responder can clash with family members, and that's when that open communication becomes vital for them to make sure that everyone in the family is getting good sleep.